A report by software industry body NASSCOM states that nearly 90% of the startups are founded by men in India. Another report by TechCrunch tells us an even more depressing statistic, which is that 98% of the venture capital fund goes to startups founded by men. These statistics are not just depressing, but they are probably a wake-up call. Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you to this session, Startup Culture, Entrepreneurial Spirit, Patriarchal Design. We know we're coming to the fag end of sci-fi, but it's perhaps one of the most pertinent topics that we need to discuss as we talk about technology, startups, the future of digital economy. And I think it's a real honor and privilege for me that we have such an interesting panel here, a very diverse panel, but in some ways I'm also taking the responsibility as a co-chair of sci-fi that I wish we had more diversity on the panel. It was not just a female-only panel, but these are some of the things that we will discuss. Sometimes we do see reverse issues, and here is one such problem, but perhaps a good problem to have. We'll talk much more about diversity and inclusion in detail, but let me kick off this discussion by getting a sense of how deep and grave is the problem. How much does this problem of patriarchy, lack of diversity and inclusion run within this startup entrepreneurial ecosystem? Let me start by actually getting Diksha to kick off her thoughts, because Diksha, you're a journalist, you're someone who's covered the tech space actively, you're someone who has, in some ways, a bird's eye view of what's going on in the tech space. When you come across data like what we've just talked about, it is clearly time for introspection as to what's going wrong. Do you have a sense of why we're seeing a trend like this, and how deep is the problem?
So the data that you mentioned, it actually tells us quite clearly that it's a very, very, it's a very tough situation for women entrepreneurs. I think from what I have been told by various women entrepreneurs and investors, the problem is the pipeline. So there are several bubbles in the tech startup ecosystem in India. There is this bro culture first, and then there is this IIT culture. So if you look at most of our unicorns are started by men. Most of them are led by men. I think I can only think of one unicorn, which is ShopClues, which has a woman co-founder. But and the other bubble, like I said, is the IIT bubble. And if you look at, I think less than 10% or maybe 8% women go to IITs, and most of the investors are from IITs. So that creates a capital problem for women who do want to get into entrepreneurship later. I think there is also a skill problem. So there was this recent study that Quartz published, where the researchers spoke to some 8,000 women engineers across the country. And although women, and I'm sticking to tech ecosystem right now, women are really motivated and keen to become to go to tech institutes, to go to engineering schools, but there is a skill gap. Yeah. So they are usually not going to the top engineering schools. They are not going to IITs. They're not going to your BITS Pilanis. And what's happening is that because they are going to schools which are probably not up to the mark, they're not up to date with the latest in the tech industry. They don't have enough exposure to even the new programming languages, for instance. Some of them are not even comfortable coding in one language. So I think, so all these factors contribute to what we're seeing in this ecosystem, which is so male dominated right now.
So at least we're acknowledging the problem, one. Yes. B, we're trying to understand the reasons for the problem. Yeah. Shelly, if I could bring you in here, because Diksha mentioned, the bro culture. And I think Silicon Valley companies are often accused of having a very toxic, sexist bro culture, but it's something that they realize that it's important for them to change, and change rather quickly. We're seeing now a very active trend of companies not only waking up and acknowledging the problem, realizing that diversity and inclusion is not just a nice to have, it's something that's important, it looks good, it's something you talk about, but it's also become business critical. It's something that that helps you if you are a more diverse workplace. Share with us what are the trends you're observing in Silicon Valley.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we were talking that bro culture should probably be now Madam Boss or Lady Leaders, hashtag. I think it's really interesting. I mean, at Facebook, like most tech companies, Google, Amazon, and sort of Salesforce is the same, is that, there's a perception. The perception is that why are there very few women in the tech industry? It's too aggressive, the work hours are really unsociable, it's too technical, it's complicated, you wouldn't understand it. So obviously at a very young age, what are we teaching our kids? What are we actually, how are we raising that awareness in terms of, what the benefits of technology can be, not just for products and business, but for health, education, wider social issues. Less than 33% in India are internet users. That's the women cohort. So I think what we at Facebook, we always say that, we need to sort of hire for solutions. So a lot of it is thinking very subjectively about what does diversity look like in the workplace. How do you manage those biases? We say a lot at Facebook, be yourself, be authentic. I get criticized a lot for being too nice. I'm British, I'm very polite. I say please, thank you, sorry, a lot, many times in the day. And I'm not, I'm too old to change, but I think it's very important that we don't manufacture a sort of a breed of new women leaders that have to be a certain type. You don't, and I sort of use this term very loosely, but we don't have to sort of compete with men to get to the top. We should be ourselves. It should be embracive, inclusive, and I think you're right. We ought to have. I hope a lot of the men in the audience will ask us questions about this. But I think it's important that we change together, that we sort of, it's a little bit like saying, put your money where your mouth is and,
right.
and let's walk the talk. So while a lot is happening that's very forward-thinking in Silicon Valley, in the tech community, I think it's still very old-fashioned. I think,
Yes.
I would hate for us to be here in 12 months' time still having the same conversation. I hope that we can find some answers in terms of how we move forward. And we've got some great people here who are sort of leading and championing, new entrepreneurship across the world.
Right, and I think we will go deeper into what some of the tech companies can do. And as you said, that it's change that we need to accelerate. We cannot wait another 12 months and have that same conversation. We do need to say that we've made progress, but the progress so far has been slow. I want to come to you, Seva, because you are a tech YouTuber, and it's something that's interesting, because at a time when we're talking about and trying to identify the basic issues as to why we see the trends that we're seeing, I think part of it is also around stereotypes, gender stereotypes that we see all the time. You would not have enough female students taking up STEM programs. But again, when we talk about the encouraging trend, we are seeing now women in tech programs, women in tech summits. We're seeing an active participation on getting women to start coding, to solve some of what Diksha was also saying, that when you just don't have enough women out there, how do you even solve the problems? So what are your thoughts on some of those trends you're picking up?
I think it's very good, right? So there's a lot of trends that are like, there's a lot of effort to teach women how to code, a lot of boot camps and programs that are specifically designed for women in a lot of these spaces, which is really great, because for a lot of women, for a lot of women, the tech industry seems very scary and very far away. And what you want to do is you want to introduce a safe space to introduce people to coding and introduce people to things, right? And I studied computer science at a university. And for a lot of the girls who leave computer science, they don't feel like computer science is hard, but they don't want to be in an environment where they constantly have to prove themselves. So this constantly trying to prove yourself game gets very exhausting. And in boot camps, a lot of the time, isolating women and showing them that they can code, they have the abilities, they have have the strengths, it's really helpful in getting them that initial push, that initial interest. And what's up for them to decide is that, do I actually like coding? Do I really like this industry? As opposed to, do I want to be around a certain environment? So all these initiatives that are designed to teach and help women how to code are actually more powerful than we realize. And for me, it's very exciting to see this energy and to help women in coding. But then we need to look at things like, what happens, we're introducing women to the industry, right? But how are we getting them to stay in the industry? Because, you know, you go to a boot camp that's just women, you learn how to code, you don't have a subconscious bias about what the industry looks like. You get to the workplace and then you have to deal with the real issue of people not thinking you're a developer, then you have to go back to square one with constantly trying to prove yourself. And then that's where we need to take a 360 approach with women's careers to ensure that women aren't getting into tech and then dropping out. Because one of the main reasons that women leave technical roles or even any other role is because they don't feel the support that they need to grow in their careers. So they often leave their roles because they feel like they've hit a wall too quickly and they'd rather invest in other careers, which is very different because no one in tech will ever tell you that there's a wall. It always feels like there's infinite progress. And then you've got the other side, the other gender feeling like, I just felt that I hit a wall too quickly.
Yeah, so is there a real wall is something that we should talk about a little more in detail. But I want to go to Khalila here because Khalila, share with us some of the work that you've been doing, and also within that, when we talk about gender equality, again, these have now become fashionable conversations.
Right.
But is gender equality simply a switch that can be turned on, or is there systemic change that needs to be brought about?
Thank you, Shweta. Definitely not, right? Firstly, my name is Khalila Mbowe, and I am the founder and CEO of a group of social enterprises in Tanzania called Unleashed Africa Social Ventures. Now, one of the things I have to start by saying is, one, we need to identify, realize, and remember that women are not smaller men. And I find that in my space, I find that, you know, that's the narrative that's out there. Looking historically, trying to look at, okay, so where did this gap start appearing in society? How did this mindset of women being the lesser gender start cropping up in society? And research tells you that this has been in existence for over 8,000 years. You know, these mindsets are so entrenched in each one of us, even within this room right now. And sometimes it's very hard to identify the mental models at play in our own minds, such that it's hard to once you don't know there's a problem existing within yourself, it's harder to solve the collective, right? So it's one of those things that I feel, to be able to make any progress in this space, every single person needs to identify that we are all individually to blame for the issues at hand, and we are individually responsible to find it within ourselves, to identify the mental models going on within, to be able to tap into them and to be able to address them from there. Otherwise, it's not a switch. You cannot wipe out 8,000 years in a conference, in an event, with a nice article and through a workshop. It has to be, there's got to be a systems lens towards it, and we individually need to identify that we are systems at play within the bigger system. And then how do I confront, the biases within before I point fingers and say there's an issue there? Because sometimes you'd find that women, within ourselves, we are the perpetrators of this issue, right? We're the ones that in most cases are the ones who are widening this gap, right? And it's not just about tech. If we look at the startup ecosystem, from tech to media to fashion, to the arts, to politics, right? There's a conversation back home where we were trying to identify why women would not vote for women. And one of the things that they were saying is, well, I'm a woman, you're a woman, I know all the issues that I go through. I wouldn't have been able to do it. I don't think you'd be able to do it either. And it's things that are so simplistic, but they're such entrenched within the way that we think about gender, and with the who's inferior, who's superior, and it's very important to start with us. And I do not believe that it's going to happen within the next few months or the next few years, but it's going to have to be gradual and intentional effort for each and every single person. And I feel that that's the horn that we need to toot.
Perfect, and that takes me to Keyzom, because when we're talking about the fact that there are mental models that exist, it's deep-rooted, it's not something you can fix overnight. At the same time, we realize that we're now beginning to address the problem. When you talk about digital payment system, when you talk about making that ecosystem more diverse and more inclusive, you also realize that you need to first address the root of the problem. For instance, in this case, financial independence. How is it that we make women more financially independent? How is it that we drive that change, not just at the top when we talk about boardrooms and breaking the glass ceiling or the startup founders, but at the grassroots level? Because if we don't solve that problem, we're not going to get those numbers out there that Diksha just started the conversation with.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm from the Better Than Cash Alliance, and we are focused on moving cash to digital payments. And we do this because gender and women's access to digital payments and services, including financial services, is just has such a big gender gap. And we know that this is because when we look at the startups and the financial institutions and the new age fintech companies that are coming on board to solve the issue of exclusion, that they are largely being defined and put together in the form of services by men. So therefore, to really solve the issue, grassroots issue of exclusion, to solve a woman's access to financial services or digital services through digital payments, you actually need to go back to that same boardroom and see how many women are talking about what women need, and how is the issue of women's needs being addressed at that level to then impact what are the services that become available at the grassroots level. And therefore, for the Better Than Cash Alliance, as a UN-based partnership, it's important to weave in the dialogue of where are the women's voices in the startup culture, because it impacts development outcomes. So this is a very important discussion for us at the Better Than Cash Alliance, for all the members, to which India is also a member, and largely because we need to close the loop now. We cannot be solving the issues of exclusion by just talking to a poor woman or a smallholder farmer who is supported by his wife, who saves the money to send her children to schools without actually looking at what are the products and services being designed for her and her needs, and therefore what is then the implications in terms of how we can close the loop.
So I think we've identified at least a certain set of issues that are coming in the way of making that change, and that's quite evident. But what concerns me particularly is that you'd expected that in 2019 things would be a bit different, and especially when you're talking about the startup ecosystem that we have right now. After all, these founders are all very young. They come from the millennial generation, and the expectation generally would be that this is now the next generation. This is the generation that's expected to be evolved. It's the generation that's disrupting everything through the startup culture, be it mobility or payments or retail. Just look at the kind of disruptions that are taking place around us. Look at the kind of changes that the startup culture is bringing about. And yet, the most important change that we want that should happen, which is around the whole, getting rid of the whole patriarchal system, getting startups to be more diverse and inclusive, is not happening. So what has gone wrong? Where did we go wrong that even in this new generation of entrepreneurs, we've seen this problem so evident? So I'd leave it open for anyone to answer that.
Okay, I'll go. So I think entrepreneurship as a respectable profession is fairly new in India. I feel like when I was growing up, or even in, I think till probably Flipkart became big, everybody wanted to join Microsoft or Infosys and go abroad and work there and get a green card. I don't think anyone saw entrepreneurship as a respectable profession. In fact, I've met a lot of now unicorn founders who say things like, their parents were appalled. They said, "Tumse shadi kaun karega if you get into this, if you start a company and don't take up a job in an MNC." So I think now we have come to a stage where we see where we see them as rock stars. But it's still fairly new, and I think.
But if I could just interrupt you here, wouldn't it be? Isn't it ironical that we feel that way? Because you talk about the whole work-life balance and women being married off. Isn't it true that the entrepreneurial workspace also allows you greater flexibility? Is exactly what women need right now. Isn't that a perfect opportunity for women to be in the workplace and yet enjoy the flexibility they keep talking about?
So I think when you look at it, depends on which stage the company is in. So a lot of companies, a lot of big companies, now the companies that have become big, they started with this one guy in the college hostel deciding, hey, this is a good idea. And then he recruited other college mates and, basically people in the same hostel to join him. And those are the people who are now in leadership positions. But I think that companies that have become bigger, including companies like Flipkart, they are doing a lot to retain women. They have a lot of, they seem to have a lot of good policies, especially around supporting women during maternity breaks or when they come back to the workforce. So I think it's slowly happening. But during the early stages of a startup, I think most of the founders rely on their own network. So that's why you have that bro culture in the beginning.
Yeah.
Second, a lot of times they do not have. A lot of times I felt that it's not exactly a safe space because they don't really have an HR department. They don't really have a lot of policies in place. So a lot of parents also feel that, why should my daughter travel alone at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m.? Because yes, a startup can be flexible, but it's chaotic. There's a lot of work in the beginning.
Right.
So there are a lot of factors at play here, and I think they're slowly being addressed, but it's a slow process.
Shelley, you have a thought.
No, I would just add to that as well. I think, in our space, we do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and peer-to-peer learning is really critical. I think for women especially who are perhaps working in their homes, to be able to be in the online space, and again, the access to connectivity, digital literacy, that kind of skilling, and just be part of community groups where you can share and be motivated by other people's experiences. I think that's something that we really ought to encourage more. We ought to encourage more at a much more grassroots level in languages, just help penetrate better through, whether it's even, through radio or through songs, entertainment, just so that it normalizes what access can mean to people. And again, the economic benefits to that and how that will then help women in their homes be more independent and be able to help, their families as well. So to overcome some of those sort of maybe social, cultural barriers as also.
Yes, Seva.
I wanted to speak about bringing back to what you said about how we have these rock stars and we had an era of all these tech giants who were, younger men, and then why aren't we now seeing more women who are now also like younger women getting into the entrepreneurial space? And I think a huge part of it is, if you look at entrepreneurship, right, it's about seeing the value that you can provide to people, to companies, to society, and being able to monetize off of that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, women aren't encouraged to take ownership or see value in the work that they do. And it starts from a very young age with things like, you kick like a girl, right? So all of a sudden, kicking is devalued because you're doing it like a girl would, right? And if we, even a simple example like the chef industry, right? The highest paid chefs, the biggest chefs in the world are all men, but cooking was supposed to be a woman's thing, right? So you would think that as the industry grows and becomes more popular, then more women would kind of take the top chef positions, right? You'd have more cooking shows with women. But once value gets into an industry and that value is monetizable, women get very quickly kicked out of it. And that's where, we're taught to be modest with money, taught to be modest with revenue and asking for money, right? And that's where a huge part of it is entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Is seeing the value that you bring and wanting money for it and going for what you deserve. And from a very young age, women are disencouraged from that. Women are disencouraged from taking risks and potentially embarrassing yourself. And that's what entrepreneurship is. It's fail fast, move fast, and get what you deserve. But that inherently goes against a lot of what society teaches women.
And there's no doubt that those stereotypes need to change,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
those stereotypes are deep-rooted, and as Khalila was saying,
Yeah.
that, those stereotypes exist in this room as well for
Yeah.
the so-called educated. But I do want to make this a little controversial to say that while we keep talking about the need to address those stereotypes, to make sure that when we have children at home, we're not in any ways perpetuating those stereotypes. We're not saying this is
Yeah.
don't do this like a girl or boy, or have different storybooks for sons
Yeah.
and daughters. I do want to really ask this question: that is it true that there are certain roles that men are better suited to do and women are not? Is this whole thing of men are from Mars, women are from Venus something that we need to accept, or do we need to challenge and change?
As a software engineer, I
Yes.
don't think that's true.
Right.
Like, I think a lot of people still get very shocked when I tell them that I'm a developer, and I'm a software engineer, a developer. My team lead is a woman too, right? There are a lot of women who are engineers, but people still get very shocked about it, but it doesn't affect me, right? So your reproductive system is not connected to your brain.
Right. But why is it that you're still the exception, is the point? That why is it that you're not the trend and you're the exception?
Because I think that women are intentionally kicked out of the industry is another thing we need to be very brutally honest about, right? So when women enter something, it gets devalued. So there's a strong need to keep it within a specific group so that it can be overvalued. And I have seen this personally where women aren't encouraged to stay in tech simply because the industry just doesn't want women. And another thing is that
Why is it?
because
Can I-
devalue. Yes.
Can I just jump in there?
Sure.
One of the things that I feel, there are some things that, so if I want to pick up something heavy, I'll look for the next guy in the room and say, please help. Let me just put that out there. Even though I do believe, so I believe it's very relative, right? Are some activities better suited for ladies than men and vice versa? I think it's very relative. It's very hard to say yes or no. But one of the things that I think, and just to kind of bring that into your question about, there's been a lot of disruption going on. Why aren't we seeing this in this conversation about gender? Is because I don't feel that the definitions of success have moved. They haven't matured. The same definitions of success we have been going with for the last 500 years are the same ones that we're going for now.
And could you elaborate on that? When you say definition of success, what are you referring to?
So if we're talking about the successful entrepreneur, the successful CEO, we're looking at the most assertive person in the room, the most charismatic person in the room, the risk taker, the one who is able to come in and conquer a whole room. An introvert is definitely not that person. A person who has responsibilities in the home is definitely not that person. You have to be flexible 24/7. There's got to be an aura about you that just sends Eskimos out of their caves. Now, one of the things is I feel that women come with innate qualities that, bring so much value into enterprises. But as long as, we have women who are coming out, even as an entrepreneur, trying to replicate or to become what we see the men are, we are losing out. So what happens in the startup ecosystem, and I run an annual accelerator program, is I see young women coming with great ideas, great enterprises, but they are replicating the men in their sectors. And you're trying to mimic what the guys do to succeed so that you can kind of map out the journey towards success. And I tell them you're actually shooting yourself in the foot.
Right.
Because the things that make you unique, the things that are unique about you are that's the secret sauce. So what are those things within you that you can put out that would help you push forward? So so we measure success by, of course, revenue that an organization is able to bring out. We measure success by, how fast you're able to scale and so on and so forth. But then, are we, as a social enterprise, and some things that I choose to measure within my organization, I measure success by the ability of my employees to succeed. I run an enterprise where I have a team of women. I'm like, your success equals my organization's success. And for me, when somebody comes into the organization, one of the most important things I ask is, what is success to you? Not just what does your salary look like, but being in this organization, what does success look to you? As you're serving me, how can I serve you and make sure that you grow to the best person you can be as you serve and we serve together, right? But these are questions that organizations are not asking. It's always just about the bottom line, and I feel that we need to multiply this bottom line.
And I think that brings me to the other point of now being solution-oriented. The fact that we understand, we acknowledge the problem, but are we ready to come up with bold solutions to solve some of those problems? For instance, Shelley, I'll come to you about how we're talking about just the amount of change this would take. There are leaders like Sheryl Sandberg who are going and talking about the whole lean in movement and bringing about that change, and that change is real. There are leaders that I feel very proud of working for a company like Salesforce, where our CEO, Mark Benioff, did not shy away from signing a check of $3 million to fix the gender pay gap literally overnight. And now that figure has gone up to $10 million because it's a commitment that Mark Benioff has to say, you know what, if there's a problem, I'll fix it, and I'll fix it today. So I think the need for bold leadership to go and say, we don't have time to fix this, we need to do it now.
Well, you're right, and I think we do need to so the Sheryl Sandbergs and leaders that we have across the world. Who is that in India? Who can kind of champion that cause for young girls? And it's not just people that are going into IIT or looking to go to business school. For a girl at home, give them the gadgets that you would give your son. Give them the same education, or toilets in a school. I mean, we need to change infrastructure as well. Offline and online is we're moving in parallel. So the offline world mirrors what's going online, vice versa. And just as we have huge concerns around safety. A lot of the barriers, again, for women, sometimes, whether it's being online or having anything to do with technology, is simply, I don't feel safe. I don't understand it. I don't want anything to do with it. And yet some people loosely think, well, it's fun, it's entertaining, but is it relevant? Right. So again, I think there is. I would really advocate strongly for us to some of those great women leaders and great men leaders as well. I think we need to own our voice. We need children at school, that we need to start this at a very early age, and embrace it as something more positive, and think about the benefits as opposed to what may be harmful or what may be negative.
Sure, and as we talk about bold solutions, I think the other thing that we want to address is, and it's again something controversial that I want to put out there for anybody to answer, maybe Keyzom, this is something that I'd like you to address. When we talk about bold solutions, we also have to understand that, are we ready to take, let me quote the example of, We Hub, which is the Women Entrepreneurs Hub, which is a venture capital fund set up by the Telangana government, which will only fund women startups. Now, my question here is that on one hand we talk diversity, on one hand we talk inclusion, but on the other hand, it brings us to the whole debate we've had for many years around affirmative action. Like, are we willing to say that, yes, we need to make those bold decisions, yes, regulatory action is required, yes, we need intervention at the policy level to set those statistics right? Or do you think that in some ways speaks of double standards?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, really, because oftentimes affirmative action, as well as making the space for a particular gender or a particular race or a group of people, often people equate that with lowering standards, which is never the case in my humble opinion. It's rather about creating that safe space, redefining some of the assumptions around success, for example, as has been mentioned, as well as providing the right kind of support that is not currently thought about in a startup culture.
Sure.
So in that sense, these are the type of things that I believe can change the way in which we can increase women's participation in the startup culture and make it safe, make it productive, make it transformative. And, you know, you mentioned that there are unicorns out there, and it's, you know, they are, you know, sort of shaking up status quo. But if we really look carefully in the case of India, for example, I mean, so much is happening, but it's only in urban, semi-urban areas.
Right.
We are still not designing for the, you know, underbanked, unbanked, for someone who is not within the reach of our imagination. And there we end up creating a lot of inequalities. So
Sure.
therefore, having that diversity in terms of gender, in terms of backgrounds, in terms of voices becomes extremely important.
Right. And you're saying it's okay to bring about those interventions to fix the problem.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, because the problem is so large, it's so deep that it is okay if we do that, because we still have such a long way to go.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna pause here and ensure that we make this interactive and invite certain questions. If I could just request you to keep your question brief, and if possible, address it to a specific panelist.
The boy has cold, he will be taken to the doctor. If the girl has fever, she will not be taken to the doctor. This is, I am telling real facts which I observe day in and day out. Who will change our mindset of our female? In last 10 years, we have managed, please excuse me, we have managed to clean 3 crore 30 lakh girls.
Right.
There used to be 981 girls for 1,000 boys. Last year census, it has come down to 912. In Punjab, there are only 768 girls for 1,000 boys. Why don't you hit at the ground level? Man will be born from mother. 52% female are anemic in my country. I live in Gurgaon, opened a anemia clinic. I am so sorry from my heart to say to you, 76% girls are anemic. Why don't we work at the ground level?
Right, so the need to address this at the grassroots level, I think, and any of you could take that, because it is true that countries like India are making huge progress. We're talking about unicorns being led by founders. We're talking big, but unless we address the problem at the grassroots level, female infanticide is something which is real. We deal with it, you know. So how do we fix the problem at the grassroots before taking it? Yeah, Shelley, I think you want to answer that.
No, and thank you, sir, for your question. We just came this morning. We're running a program for tribal girls. So we met with the Union Minister for Tribal Affairs, and I think it's what was very important when we were hearing from these girls, some of them who've experienced exactly the same inequity, also trafficking and very poor economic opportunities. The point is that they said to us this morning, take us into the light. What we experience a lot is this darkness, and if we are not given the same opportunities and the same, again, Digital India, make it more inclusive, make it more holistic, give us the same opportunities that you want for the wealth of this 1.2 billion population. And companies like ourselves, we have a huge responsibility to really impact. We talk about communities. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's mission statement is I want to bring people online to ensure that we grow this community and you have the most positive experience possible. But we do have a long way to go, and I think again it comes back to what do we need to do in in parallel to all of this, and it's the infrastructure of toilets, of education, of clean water, of good sanitation, and so that we do enable communities to also have, you know, better access to services as well.
Sure, and as a follow-up to that, maybe Khalila, Keyzom, any of you would like to answer that? You know, when we talk about some of these programs, we talk about the work being done by tech companies. Do you think tech as such is increasing the gender divide, or is it bridging it?
I think that the gender divide in tech is just a replication of the gender divide offline, right? 72 gender gap that has not been bridged. Then we're taking the same issues we're having in society right now and we're moving them to the digital world, right? And just to the gentleman's question with, you know, now, my question is, you know, who is responsible for changing mindsets? Right? One of the biggest issues that I normally say we're facing is a lot of people who claim this to be a problem are not forefront in changing it from themselves. It really has to start individually. And most of the times I try to poke and say, before we start saying, you need to, we need to, what is the I doing? What am I doing to make sure that, you know, I'm forefront in changing this mindset for myself? And to head towards the collective, we have to start individually, right? And another issue that we're facing right now is the whole conversation of inclusion has been so commoditized, right? That there are so many people actually profiting from it, that, you know, at the end of the day, it's become the hot topic, but really not much is happening to bridge this divide, right? Because then we'll sit in spaces like this and talk about it, make each other feel good, but then I'm like, okay, so what are you committing to doing right afterwards? What are we practically doing on ground? How am I talking to my child at home? How am I making sure that within my community, I am the voice of reason, right? So we need to get from this talk good, feel good conversations and come into, okay, what am I individually doing to bridge this gap, right? Before we start pointing fingers. And I feel that once we do that, then we're going to start having real progress.
Sure. Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, I think, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gugitz and I'm a strategy consultant. My question is prompted from the discussion around affirmative action. And for me, affirmative action is not changing what the rules of success are, but rather allowing a broader pool to even play in the first place. So it's not about that we're changing what success is. We are actually selecting more than what we would have, because we're not just selecting the people who look like us. So the question more is for Shedi, working at Facebook. You know, what are the policies of tech companies like yours on affirmative action? And is it viewed in this way, or is it viewed in a way that, oh, we're going to change the rules because now we're allowing different people to come in?
I don't think we have a choice. I think it comes back to, you know, that we are, why we talk about bridging the gender divide digitally, but you're right. I mean, offline, the reality is that we do have to, you know, we have to do more in terms of access and women. And I run programs for South Asia and Central Asia, and a big part of my focus is really how do I improve access for women, because that to me is an audience, is a target group, especially in India, who can make a massive impact on the economy. If we talk about a $5 trillion economy for India, and we're looking at how do we grow businesses, how do we ensure that women have a safe experience online, how do we make sure that when we're looking at sustainable development goals as well, in terms of, you know, how do we ladder up to equity and issues that are important to the Ministry of Women and Child Development, skilling, education, IT ministries, and these are all important for my team at Facebook, especially when we are looking at, you know, how do we make a better impact through technology for communities, and how do we reach more women as well through those programs, and that's you know, and I think that is critical, and it has to it has to also trigger a mindset.
Great. I'm going to quickly take the next two questions because I realize there are a few more and we have only 6 minutes to go. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Again, here myself, Nabiha Khan. I want to draw the attention of all the members present here that what's the main problem regarding patriarchy. Here we can see we have all the female members on the panel discussing patriarchy. Here the problem lies.
Right.
We only women are discussing patriarchy. Why men or we community as a whole are not discussing the problems facing by the women?
Sure.
Here my questions like, why we are not having a single male member on the panel today?
I think that's something I acknowledged right at the beginning, that I think we take responsibility of that yes, we have to include men in the conversation. It is not a conversation that has about women, driven by women, to be executed by women. Unless we include male leaders in the conversation, we can't make progress. I'm going to obviously let the others answer that too. And if I could just have that one more question.
Add one more point to this.
Okay, very
quickly. In addition
quickly,
to this, I want to say, I just want to invoke this, that not only women should feel the need of women, even more and more men should also feel the requirement, what needs to be invoked in the normal startup, basically we are talking about startup or the employment field.
Sure. The next question.
Hi, my name is Shikha. So I have a very similar question actually. When we talk about this bro culture or this tendency of men hiring more men, but at the same place, trying to make workplaces more women friendly. We have now regulations in place like the maternity leave, and we were recently talking about a menstrual leave. But the thing is, for a man in the same team, he's the one who is sharing the load or probably filling in while the woman is absent for very fair reasons. But what is the solution to this problem? This is probably why men don't want to hire women. So this gap also needs to be addressed.
And
so
I want to
any
just
of you.
follow up to that and say that, a trend that happened in India at least, and I was talking to some HR executives and executives who've been given diversity targets, actually said that, after the maternity leave was introduced for 6 months, they actually saw a dip in hiring in hiring women candidates, because on one hand it was seen as revolutionary, as something progressive, that you now have legislations and policies in place, but do they even backfire at times?
Yeah, I think I definitely think they can, and the issue is that parenthood is something that affects both men and women. So when we make maternity leave, it's important to remember that the paternity leave needs to match up to it, so that if men are also taking 6 months off after having a child, then that's not a woman issue. It becomes an issue with parenthood, parents, and that represents a larger society, right? So it's not just for women, so that it's not something that can be used against women. Because at the end of the day, if men are also taking the same amount of paternity leave, it doesn't become a gender thing, it just becomes a parental thing. And to answer your question about, it's really important to have more men in these discussions. And yeah, it's really important because you know what? Women have been complaining about society injustices. Women have been complaining about patriarchy, inclusion. We've been taken to the streets and marching for a very long time. And at the end of the day, the people who make the decisions about whether we get our rights or not are men. And so when we have these discussions and voice out the same things over and over again, the important thing is that it lands in the right ears and it's man translated. When we have men who are teaching other men, at the end of the day, it sucks that men have like a much more powerful voice than us to speak to other men, but when they have those discussions with other men in the little man groups, it's much more powerful than when we have it, right? Because if you know that you don't care about women inclusion, it's very easy for you to leave the room the moment someone announces the topic. But if a man is there and a man is talking about it, it triggers a different level of interest. So it is very, to answer you, it's very important to have these discussions as a group because it's a societal issue, it's not a women's issue.
Right, and I agree that our panel may not be very diverse, but the audience certainly looks very diverse, which is clearly heartening for a conference like this.
Yeah.
Possibly 2 more questions. I could see some hands being raised there. Yeah, please go ahead.
National Livelihood Mission of Ministry of Rural Development organizes women collectives throughout the villages, and they are doing remarkable work in doing. They provide access to credit, access to capacity building, and they form women collectives at village levels. So some of the women collectives have been more have had more access to finance than the village panchayat also. And
Right.
Currently also, like as a demonstration of that, right under India Gate there is a fair going on which is being organized by Saras Mela by Ministry of Rural Development, which has women participating from all the states, bringing their products and selling it. So those kind of collectives can be I think Facebook can help those kind of collectives to have more access to markets and then bring them more to forefront. This is not necessarily tech per se, but this is about
Sure.
women.
Sure. Diksha, do you want to take that? I know he talked about Facebook specifically, but would you like to address
I think the bigger problem in India is, and it's not restricted to tech startups, is a woman is unable to grow her business and also stick with it for a really long time because of capital. Access to capital is our biggest problem, and it doesn't matter whether you are in tech or in any other space. So I'm interested in seeing what Shelly has to say about this, or what Keyzom.
Well, I was going to say that, absolutely right. Access to finance is one of the biggest challenges of small businesses, particularly those that are owned by women that don't have the informal networks to borrow from. However, we also see that digital payments is now creating, new data footprints that allow women to then become credit worthy and fill in that gender gap on access to finance for small businesses. So there are challenges, but there are also opportunities that we're seeing. And I think, it's important for us to talk about challenges, but also talk about solutions to those
Sure.
challenges.
Sure, and I think that's a perfect note to end this panel on, because it is true that we do. I know you have a question, but it's saying time's up. Okay, very quickly. You can just be loud. Yeah.
So my observation is, it's working now, that I think we need to create more awareness about what are the benefits of having women in leadership positions and leading tech discussions and being part of discussions, product development, and what is the economic benefits of women being in that positions. To give you an example, my organization has a women CEO. My manager is a woman. And I find her to be...
Which is the organization? Could you mention that?
The Practice. It's a communications consultancy firm.
Right.
And I find my CEO and my boss to be much more compassionate, and that motivates me to work harder and give better than that I can possibly. It helps me work harder in my job.
So I think I'll take that question if it's okay with all of you. It's great that we're seeing that trend where we can definitely establish why diversity makes business sense. It's not just a tick in the box, it's not just a target or a number because it's fashionable and it's nice to have, but there is real business sense and merit in having more women leaders at the top or more women entrepreneurs. I think there are enough number of studies that are now being commissioned, but we can start another debate around whether we are perpetuating stereotypes by saying women are more compassionate or not, but we're going to leave that
Also, studies have shown that attrition rate among the women is lowest.
Exactly. But I do know that we have to wrap it up here. We understand that there are definite barriers out there, there are definite challenges out there, whether it is something as basic as mindset issues that need to be addressed to something more specific as access to capital that are actually coming in the way of that change that we need to bring about. At the same time, we do think that there is a ray of hope. We're seeing bold decisions being taken. We're seeing leaders standing up and saying, yes, change has to be brought about. We're seeing the likes of you saying, you know what, coding is not just for men, and let's see that we bring that change about rather quickly. And as Shelley said, we should not be having that same conversation at Next Sci-Fi and say that we've made some progress. Thank you so much, all of you.